Hello, my name is Aaron Perrott and I'm the CTO at KTSL. And today I'm going to be speaking about the use of AI within service management, the what, the why, and the how. In this presentation, I will outline the facts of what AI can achieve without the myths. In the what, we'll look at what AI is and what it isn't, using plain English to explain some of the terms used in AI and what AI can actually do. In the why, I'll explain how it can add value within service management and what it's good at. And finally, in the how, we'll look at how it can be implemented across service management, bringing in some use cases. I think AI has an important role to play in service management by helping us save time, increase consistency, and open up new channels to improve customer satisfaction, which is why I want to talk to you about it today. Let's start with the what. You hear many stories about AI and it's a hot topic both in the media generally and also within IT. In some ways, it's a victim of its own hype, with confusion around what it can actually do. This hype unfortunately sometimes provides unnecessary barriers and complexity to using it. There is often skepticism around its value or that it can do everything it promises. In this section, I want to break it down to plain facts, speaking clearly about what it can do now and what it can't. AI is a wide topic, so for this presentation, I am focusing on what parts of AI are specifically useful within service management. Let's start with how AI can actually process language. The key term you may have heard is natural language processing. Natural language processing is simply a term used for how computers read language. NLP processes turn text into structured data, which a computer can understand. We'll talk more about the terms inside NLP shortly. NLP is made up of two subcomponents: natural language understanding, NLU, and natural language generation, NLG. NLU is a type of NLP, which covers the way NLP reads the data and finds the intent of the sentence, the classification, and the sentiment. NLG is how the computer responds, so how it turns that structured data back into sentences to reply back to the chatbot or to the conversation or to the analytical report. NLP uses two components to understand sentences. These are keywords, which is sometimes called pattern matching, and vectors. The first is more obvious. It looks for words which directly match an understanding. For example, if it sees the word teams, it would know that this could be something I want to know about or I have an issue with. However, the word itself is not enough to understand the sentence structure, and this is where vectors are used. Text vectorization is a methodology in AI NLP to map words or phrases from vocabulary to a corresponding vector or number sequence, and you use that to predict the sentence or find the semantic or the intent. You can vectorize a document, a sentence, a phrase, or even a single word by using different vectorization techniques and pre-trained language models. In very simple terms, this turns sentences into numbers so a machine can read them and understand them. Let's go back to our teams example. If I take two sentences, so name all the teams in the Football League. Now we know that in that construct, I'm talking about a football team. But if I use the sentence, I cannot connect to my Teams meeting, well then we know that the word Teams is meaning Microsoft Teams. The word Teams wouldn't be enough to know what use of the word Teams I was referring to in those two cases. I need to know what words are around the word Teams to get the meaning of the sentence. And that, in short, is sentence vectorization. Let's look further at NLU. NLU is how the sentence is broken up. It allows NLP to have subsets of information. NLU breaks up the sentence into the following criteria: intents, entities, classification, and sentiment. Intents are nothing but verbs, so activities that the user needs to do. If we want to capture a request or perform an action, we use an intent. Entities are the nouns or the content for the action that needs to be performed. It is possible to have multiple intents for a single entity and also multiple entities for an intent. However, by breaking these down, AI can start to interpret the sentence. This still isn't enough to interpret a whole meaning. We need to also classify words. So for example, locations, types, or even a configuration item in terms of service management context. We can tell AI how to classify based on what we're trying to achieve. So in IT, for example, a good classification may be the CI and the purpose of the incident or the request. Finally, we have the sentiment, and this looks to see if the user is happy, sad, or annoyed. Our placement of words helps us understand the tone of the sentence. All of this is second nature to us as humans, but remember, AI needs to reduce everything to numbers to process it. And these processes are what allows it to then interpret what we mean. Even with all the techniques we've mentioned, AI isn't magic. It needs to be trained. Targeted supervised learning is key to improvement. AI will occasionally interpret requests incorrectly, and this is where we need to train it. There are many ways of doing supervised learning. For example, telling the AI how to interpret 2,000 tickets in the right way. However, a better way of doing it is to target groups of data it gets incorrect, i.e., train it once to spot the right pattern. It can then use the previous techniques we've mentioned and reapply them, and therefore start to understand a broader range of sentence structures. Targeted supervised learning is much more efficient. The second key is to constantly feed the AI the feedback and more tickets. The more it gets, the more corrections it gets, the better it becomes. If you remember, Google will constantly ask, "Do you mean?" Now it hardly ever does, but that's because it's had years and years and millions of people training it. You can never have enough data for AI to learn from. A constant stream of data will continually improve its level of understanding. Finally, AI is consistent. It will continuously learn without fatigue or bias. It doesn't get bored, and it won't tire of reading the same incident. It's this repetition without bias which makes it such a good analytical tool for service management, because it will continue to read every single ticket in a consistent fashion in the way that it's been trained. And by doing this, it allows it to read millions of records very quickly and very consistently. And this allows us to benefit from its capability. Now let's move on to the why. AI is useful because it can basically make our lives easier. If I want to understand what's happening in my IT estate, I don't want to read a million tickets. I don't want to rely on users categorizing what's happening or agents doing that categorization. I have to at the moment because I have no other option. But what if AI did the reading and allowed my problem and knowledge teams to take what it's found and then make the improvements? Let the AI turn the data into something consistent. Let it spot the trends. And let me use my human knowledge and experience to then make a difference or a change without doing the time-consuming, boring activity first. AI can read 1 million tickets in one day. It can then use NLP to classify them, interpret them, and produce the analytics. So let it do it. It can then train my chatbot or produce reports for me, or combine data across multiple systems and give me something I can then use to make decisions. At the moment, AI is very bad at any emotional intelligence, whereas we aren't. So let AI do the reading and then let us make the decisions. As should be clear, AI doesn't understand everything. It won't know the reason a trend has started happening, say for example around VPN requests, because people are suddenly working from home. But what it will do is see that trend straight away. It can therefore notify a problem manager immediately that something is changing, rather than relying on a weekly or monthly reporting cycle. Because the AI can process tickets so rapidly, it can know immediately. That's a very obvious example, but because it's not constrained by categories, it will trend even small amounts of tickets. Spotting lots of small trends, even with small amounts of ticket data, can still make the same difference as one large issue. In this example, I could produce a knowledge article detailing how to fix a common VPN problem, and therefore immediately redirect the issue, using AI to help both problem and knowledge management. It can also look at change impacts, so what types of changes typically cause what types of issues. Again, I could use this to focus my testing or my comms plan, or look at in more depth at what's happening when I release certain change types. Let's look at a typical use case of that exact example. So let's look at that change in more detail. A change has happened involving SAP, and what we've done is extended the functionality for reporting. So we've new reports or some additional reporting features. Tickets were raised as users couldn't find the new report, so they weren't sure how to access that new functionality. AI has picked up on this trend from its daily review. It's then notified the problem manager, who can act quickly to produce a new self-help guide for the new reports and a new communications page. This closed down the trending incidents by moving it to an issue solved by self-service. AI then reviewed the trends across the last X number of SAP changes to see if there was any consistency in this, or whether other problems were consistently appearing. The change review board suggested that better comms ahead of the release would have solved the issue up front. However, AI also found that over the last 6 months, there's been no performance issues. And at the moment, we have an extensive testing program for that. Therefore, we could recommend that we don't focus the testing so much on performance, and allowing us to have more time to focus on comms, because that's been more the clear issue and been the problem for each release. Just a very simple example of where using AI has immediately found that piece of information, and then we can do something about it. The problem team, the knowledge team, the change team are just using that information to make the service better and to make the service more consistent. The last part of the why is speed. As mentioned, AI doesn't fatigue. And today, with modest hardware, it can process 1 million tickets in a day. It no longer needs a supercomputer to do the analysis, certainly not using the methods we've discussed and outlined within this presentation. The fact we can get the results quickly means we can spend more time in problem management, making decisions and progressing fixes, and less time working out what is happening. It means we can write better knowledge articles with better keywords, because we understand how our end users are asking for things. We can respond more quickly because we have access to reports and the data and the language being used from the summary and the descriptions, as opposed to purely the classification and categorization. And that brings me neatly onto the last section, the how. I think we could break down the how it affects service management into 3 main areas. Analytics, which we've touched on, around giving us the analytics we need. Collaboration, which is a key one. Using AI to help us work better as teams and making service management more inclusive. And finally, by bringing more automation more quickly into service management resolutions. If we look at analytics, AI can give us that continuous flow of data over multiple sources and using pre-trained models. It can provide help and assistance in identifying trends, giving us user language, spotting when things are going wrong, and helping us understand any correlation in why. We could do this historically and moving forward, i.e. if I give AI my last year's data, it could get a baseline for what's happening in my business. We could use this to hold a supplier to account, like an offshore company or an SI, or in a SIAM model, helping manage multiple vendors by getting a true baseline of what is actually happening, without the need to spend time going back over that data manually. It can help show me where a difference was made by changes using empirical data. In short, it could be an additional layer of understanding and supplement my service management teams, because I'm no longer just reliant on my categorization. I'm using my summaries, my descriptions, my work logs, my resolution text. And by reading all of this information, the level of analytics that I can glean from my data can be much more detailed. So back to my point about holding a supplier to account, I don't need to rely on their report, because I could take my data, I could quickly run it through the AI, and I can look at what's going on. Or because I understand what's happening within my desk from a service management lead perspective, I could quickly make changes, or I can quickly provide some additional training maybe to areas of the desk, or out to additional teams where potentially maybe the resolutions are poor. Because I have all of this rich level of data, all of those decisions I can take without needing to do the crunching. I'm letting AI do all of that. I'm letting it generate the analytics. and then I'm making that decision on top of that, whether that's as a service manager, a problem manager, a knowledge manager, or a change manager. Right across the service management sphere, I have the opportunity to leverage AI to do all of that heavy lifting for me. Collaboration has become more and more important. However, I think it has a much larger role to play in service management longer term. The old adage of a problem shared is a problem halved is something we do very little of in service management. We haven't really allowed anyone within the business to help IT for fear of shadow IT. However, what if we could leverage that knowledge we already have and get people to share information? What if we could reach multiple users in one go via discussion channels such as Teams, Yammer, and Slack? People want to help. It's in our nature, particularly for a common goal. The risk we've always had is how do we control that help, but make sure it's sound advice? If I Google something at home and I do it wrong, it mostly only affects me. But if I do something corporately incorrectly, it can have much more implication or ramifications. However, we can use AI to manage these channels. So we can allow it to look at Yammer or look at Teams, and where it spots a problem it knows about, respond. This means we can allow multiple people to make use of the information, but also to collaborate with AI and with each other. But let AI control the risk of shadow IT. It means you can monitor a collaboration channel without huge resources, yet still benefit from the unique opportunity it provides. This can allow us to quickly extend IT's reach into these channels whilst reducing the risk. It's a subject that I feel quite passionate about because I think we have a huge amount of IT knowledge that spans across our businesses that we do not tap into. IT is often seen still as an us and a them by the business. And I think we're really missing a massive opportunity to bring IT and the business together through some of the more modern collaboration channels that have a huge proliferation in use, particularly over the last few months. And whilst, as I said, I do feel quite passionate about this subject, it's not a topic for today, but AI can play a huge role in enabling these channels and enable us to start to reap the benefits that they can provide. Finally, I want to end on automation. Automation works where it's cost effective. In this context, AI can help us understand where the true problems lie and therefore what best to automate. It can also help us to use the right things to make people find the automation we produce by using the right keywords or suggesting the right options for that end user to take. If a user can't find it, the automation can't help them. So it's such a key component of releasing automation within service management. Also, automation itself needs structured data. For a robot to perform an action, it has to come in a format it understands. So we can use the AI to take that unstructured data that's coming in from a sentence structure it, and send it to the robot. Using the exact same processes that we discussed at the start of the presentation around NLP. Effectively, AI can take our sentences, turn them into structure via NLP, and use NLG to send that to the automation engine, allowing it to work. More readily, we may know 2 or 3 things we want to automate, but again, by using the AI's analytical layer, we may find 2 or 3 smaller things that are quicker and easier to automate, but have the same net benefit as the larger problems that we have. And again, it gives us a much better insight as to where to spend our money effectively in terms of pushing forward with an automation strategy. That's the end of my presentation today. I hope you found parts of it interesting or gives you an idea of what AI can do. Everything I spoke about today can be done now. It's all real, there's no myths. Equally, I hope I've showed some realism in where AI can genuinely add value quickly and simply. And thank you very much for listening.